Welcome, everybody. Give myself a little bit of an introduction before I introduce you to Efrain, and I'm also going to sort of set the table with some business to begin with. My name is Eva Vieira Osman. I am on the Listenwise team. I work on the marketing side, and I'm also very excited to run our webinar series. And today I'm going to be hosting this particular webinar that we're so excited to do with EdWeb on effective strategies for boosting achievement with newcomer Spanish-speaking ELLs. And I'm even more excited that we're going to be doing that with Efraín Tovar, who, if you've never met him before, I'm very excited for you to get to meet him today. We have a few things on our agenda today that I just wanted to preview for everyone so you know what's going to be happening. We're going to go through some introductions, which is coming up right now. We're also going to talk about who are our newcomers. When we talk about newcomers, who are we really talking about to make sure we're all on the same page? And what tools do they need to support their learning? And then how can teachers use podcasts and video lessons to boost achievement for newcomers? Having a dialogue about that. And finally, what digital tools exist to support newcomers in learning language and content together? And since this is coming to you from Listenwise, for those of you who are familiar with our platform, you already know the ways possibly that it could be used in your classroom for all different levels of English language acquisition. And today we're going to be talking about ways that you can tailor the product to work to also encompass your newcomer students and support them as well. For those who've never heard of Listenwise, we're going to be going in depth and talking to Efrain about how he would take one of our lessons and teach that step by step to newcomers, talking about before listening, during listening, after listening, and so on and so forth. So, practical tips coming your way. And now I would like to introduce you to Efrain. I thought I was like, there you go, ta-da! There he is in
Well,
the
good
wild.
morning. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. My name is Efrain. I typically say that our names are tied to identity, and a person's name is to him or her the sweetest, most important sound in any language. So, right off the bat, what is one thing that we can do to engage our newcomers? Pronounce their names appropriately and correctly. So, again, I'm so honored and excited to be here. I'm currently a teacher in Selma, California. Where's Selma? If you've ever had sun-made raisins, then you know where the raisins are coming from, here in Keensburg, Selma area, Central Valley in California. So again, I'm so excited to be here.
Fantastic. And Efrain, before we get started, can you tell me a little bit about your journey to become and being an EL educator?
Yeah, my journey started as a second language learner myself, and so my parents are from Mexico, and so when I started kindergarten, did not know any English whatsoever, and so my first encounter with the U.S. public school was not a positive one, and so I'll share a little bit about what can we do as leaders, educators, to be able to at least minimize the language divide in our classrooms, but more importantly, to be empathetic, to engage our newcomers. And so and I'm a passionate educator. I'm all about equity and leveraging technology to give all of our students equitable access to curriculum and to content.
Beautiful. And you already gave us a little bit of an introduction to Selma, but do you have any more that you could add about your EL population? Who are you serving in Selma for those of us who haven't
A-
had the pleasure of coming to
Absolutely.
Selma?
Absolutely. So, as many of you know, California is one of the leading states in the nation when it comes to second language learners, right? About 40% of all of our students in California are what we call in California ever ELs. These are students that include reclassified and also newcomers, right? And everyone in between. And so, here in the Central Valley, because we're primarily an ag based economy, for the most part, right? We produce one fourth of the nation's food supply here locally. And so typically we get a lot of students, obviously, from Mexico, Central America, and then also California has one of the largest Yemeni populations in the country. And so that's probably one of our top languages as well. And so in where I teach, top languages are Spanish, Punjabi, Hindi, Mixtec, Zapotec, and of course Arabic. And so those are some of the top languages that I encounter in my classroom.
Fantastic. And what is it about newcomers that particularly inspires you as an educator? You spoke about your personal experience, but wondering if there's anything else, especially given the length of your career now, that just continues to inspire you about working with newcomers.
What inspires me really is the challenge, right? How can I leverage technology and how can I leverage language acquisition to empower these students that are new to the country? Right? Typically, if you've ever learned a new language, if you've ever been to a new country, you know what the challenge is, right? But nowadays, we need to be great facilitators of information and knowledge, right? And so, as we acclimate our students to a new culture, to new smells, believe it or not, to new ways of doing things, to new ways of writing and reading, that's a huge challenge. And so, as a newcomer advocate, as a newcomer teacher, my job is to ensure that my pedagogy is up and current. What do I mean by that? I need to constantly be refining my skill set. I need to continue acquiring new tools to be able to address the vast, diverse linguistic needs of my newcomers. So I am bilingual, so that helps, right? But then again, what do I do when I have students where I don't speak and understand the language? So to me, I am a huge advocate for learning multi languages, right? Being able to acquire new language, being able to say a few words in Arabic and Punjabi and Hindi to be able to make those connections with students. So again, the ultimate goal is to ensure that all students, particularly newcomers, have every single opportunity to be successful. As I shared earlier, I teach at a middle school, so my job is to ensure that they are placed on the right track to college and career readiness, right? I also talk about getting them to be future ready learners. So that's kind of my why and why I do what I do. Again, ultimately, our students are a reflection of our society and our community. So it is our responsibility as educators to educate, to empower, and to engage all students.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, wanted to go to the next slide. And just for fun, thought this would be a good way to get the chat going. Wanted to ask the group to share the first name of your most recent newcomer in your family. If that was quite a long time ago and it doesn't spring to mind, you could always just pick somebody in your community or your social network that come to mind. And I'd also like you to tell me one fun fact about them. And this gives me opportunity to talk about my abuela, which is always one of my favorite subjects. She came to the United States from Benjamín, Guanajuato, when she was very young. She had limited schooling, but she raised a daughter who then was a teacher, a bilingual educator for 30 plus years, who then raised me. Here I am. And her grandchild is now in a dual immersion classroom, which never would have been imagined when my grandmother crossed the border. So that's also very cool. A fun fact about her that I will share with you also is that her combination of English as a second language and her great sense of humor came up. She came up with a lot of figures of speech that are not known to people outside of our immediate family, except for now, which I will share with you. One of my favorite ones is "That's the way the pickle squirts," which is something my grandma taught me. That sort of, that's the way the cookie crumbles, but her version of it. And I now share it with you and invite you to use it in any situations that you might see that is beneficial. So please share your newcomer stories. And also, like I mentioned at the top, please feel free to make questions, make observations, um, comments throughout the chat during the presentation. We won't be looking at them during the presentation, but at the very end, we will stop and we will share those out and answer some of those. So, not ignoring you, just holding it off until the very end. Next, I think it's important to identify who are the newcomers that we're talking about today. And this is a long text that I pulled from the US Department of Education Newcomer Toolkit, but I'll just sort of summarize the parts that I pulled out and highlighted that I think are particularly important to the conversation today, which is that all immigrants are not necessarily English learners, and some are fluent in English, and some speak little to no English. So already we're saying this is a big group of people when we talk about English learners, and then we're really refining it from that. So they talk a little bit about who are these people that require assistance with language acquisition, and they give the statistic that I found surprising. Some of you may or may not find this surprising, that more than 40% of identified ELs are born in the United States. So another thing that I think might be surprising for people who are thinking about who newcomers are and what their perceived needs might be. So, Efrain, I wanted to ask you, when we've talked about this in the past, you mentioned that defining who is a newcomer is still largely left to state and local agencies. Here we have a federal definition, but I wanted you to expand on that a little bit more.
Absolutely, Eva. As you know, I was taking a look at the participants in the chat. So obviously, we have some that are not from United States. You educators, obviously, you have newcomers because newcomers are around the world, right? Every single country is receiving newcomers. So I'm going to give you the United States definition of a newcomer, right? So what you see here basically is a federal definition of what a newcomer is, which is tied to particular funding called Title III funding. So that's what unites us, all of us that are here from across the United States, right? The Title III definition of what a newcomer is someone that is not born in the United States, that is foreign born, has not attended a U.S. public school for more than 3 years, right? And so when that comes into play, the question must be asked, how do we define newcomer? How do we define a newcomer at a local school district? And that is a challenge, right? To encourage those that are leading our institutions of learning to really come together and define a newcomer at the local level, right? We have the federal definition, but we also need to define it at the local level. And the reason why I say that, and the reason why I'm a big proponent of that, is because we do have many students that are US born that are also newcomers, right? And sometimes we don't track those numbers, right? We don't track them at the federal level and at the state level here in California. So, but yet these students also need the linguistic assistance to be able to adjust to a new culture, even though they're US born, but have never attended a US school, right? And to dig a little deeper into this term newcomer, right? Because if did you know that there are about 15 typologies of newcomers, right? Obviously, we talked about US born, we talked about foreign born, but we also have immigrant children and youth, and unaccompanied minors, refugees, asylees, migratory students, unaccompanied children, right, here in the United States. And so it's really important to really understand the different typologies of newcomers. And if we can go on to the next slide, Eva,
Yeah, let's get into
the
it.
next slide really talks about, okay, what are these two major groups of newcomers, right? That's why it's so important to know your newcomers data story. Typically we talk about, you know hey, let's gather all of the quantitative data on our students, right? But too often in education we miss the value of qualitative data, that one-on-one interviewing of our students, getting to know their story, getting to know them, right? And so when we take a look at the slide here, we realize that not all newcomers are the same. And so, depending how you have established these systems in your district, right? So I know some school districts have a newcomer center where they have all the newcomers go and they get assessed there. They assess their primary language because, as EL advocates, we know that language is tied not only to identity, but language proficiency is also tied to the how quickly these students will acclimate and also acquire their second or even tertiary language, right? Depending on the proficiency. But it gives us great insight to their primary language, right? So if they're proficient, we typically call these students either safe newcomers, which are students with ample formal education, or highly schooled ELs, right? But what if they come to us and they don't have that formal education, or they've had interrupted formal education, right? So that's why we call these types of newcomers life newcomers. Why is this important? Because if we cannot identify what type of newcomer they are and getting to know their data story, we might not be able to meet their linguistic needs. And we might be so fixated on getting them to quickly, acclimate and adjust, in every sense of the word, linguistically, culturally, you know, emotionally, right, to a new country. But in reality, if they're a slight newcomer, it might take them up to 2 years, an additional 2 years of language acquisition. Out here in California, we typically, and research says, right, that typically a student should be able to acquire a secondary language within a 6 year time frame, 6 to 7 years, right? But what if they're a slight newcomer? You're going to have to add an additional 2 years, which means that they may not be literate in their primary language, in their native language. So we're going to have to do additionals. We have to provide additional supports. We have to, and how do you do that to a with a secondary student, right? If they're in the primary, elementary level, it's a little easier because they have more time, to adjust and to learn the language. But if they're coming in as secondary students, we don't have much time with them. So we need to provide this intensive, strategic pedagogy in order to help them. And even with all of the ed tech products that are out there, like Listenwise, we can still leverage these awesome, learning uh, platforms to give our students, even SLIFE students, an opportunity to have access to this rigorous text. And we're going to be talking about that today.
Wonderful. Before I forget, when we move on to the next slide, where we're going to be showing this great graphic that Efrain made, we're going to have a poll go live just in a second, and I'm going to ask you to let us know what best describes your role in education. When we're talking today about who we serve, we also want to know a little bit more about you. So please submit those.
Eva, as I'm taking a look at the data that's coming in, this is really insightful because
Hmm.
the majority of our attendees are in the K-5 world, right? So,
Hmm.
you know, um, and then of course we have some secondary teachers here, that which is great, about 32%, right? So kind of a third K-5, a third secondary, and the other third administrators and others, right? Awesome.
Hmm.
We are all language teachers, right? From the TK to to 12th grade, and even administrators, right? I am so elated to see administrators here because really vision begins with, up on top, right? So if you build your newcomer toolkit, and that's only going to empower your teachers. And I often say that, ELD is not a program. What ELs do must be different. And the way to develop an effective ELD program, right, is to build your teachers' capacity, because they are the boots on the ground. They are the ones that need to learn new tools to work with their newcomers. Hence this infographic here, right? So we all, maybe, hopefully, you've heard of Dr. Krashen, right? The 5 stages of language acquisition. This is an important tool to be able to quickly identify where are my newcomers on this linguistic continuum, right? And so if they're a highly schooled EL newcomer, right, a safe newcomer, then they're going to progress through these 5 stages of language acquisition much faster, right? But if they're a slight newcomer, right, it's going to take them a little longer. But this is kind of these milestones, these 5 milestones. So if you have a newcomer, in your classroom, what are they able to do, right? So again, I truly believe in EL excellence and truly believe in setting the bar high with the right supports, because when you had set the bar high with all of your students, they are able to achieve that expectation. So when the bar is set low, guess what? They're not going to achieve much. So I'm a big proponent: set the bar high, but with the right supports, right? The right empathetic supports is also important, because if students learn from teachers that they feel are cared for, right? And if students will not learn from teachers that they don't care about them, right? So that's why, engaging the heart, I often use this word called reach, right? We must reach the heart before we teach the mind. In other words, we must reach the child before we teach them. They will not learn unless we reach them. And so use this infographic for your staff, for your newcomer teachers as a guide, right? What are they able to do on this continuum? So great resource that you guys will definitely have a copy of this. So thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So now I'd like to talk a little bit more about what our newcomers need. And here I'd like to really focus on what they need in relationship to what all of our English learners need, because our English learners and our newcomers, they are all in one. You might have a classroom with, 5 students who identify as English learners. 3 of them might be on, mixed ability, and then you're going to have your 1 or 2 newcomers. Some of you who are here today may have been teaching newcomers for a long time. Others may have found yourself in a classroom with your very first newcomer. So we want to make sure to not sort of make people feel overwhelmed by this idea that you need to see them as an island unto themselves, because they just realistically they aren't. We know that teachers are looking for tools that can be applied to newcomers and their other EL peers. So let's go through some of these points sort of through that lens. So, newcomer needs, what do they need? They need to access complex academic texts, which is something that Efrain just talked about. We want the content to still be rigorous. We just need to adjust our teaching to be able to front load that, to chunk that in a way that will really reach them. So, here are some examples of things that we know can work in this regard. Transcripts, if they're listening to something through audio. Lexile level differentiation. It is available on the Listenwise platform, so you can look at it that way. Imagery and video to build background knowledge. It's very hard to listen to something and understand it if you don't know what people are talking about. So beforehand, getting a sense of what are we going to be talking about today? What are some of these nouns that we're going to be hearing about, and things like that. Key vocabulary words connects to what I just talked about, text-based questions, and of course, assessment. One of the great things about Listenwise is that we provide the assessment tools in the platform ready to go for you. You can customize them so that they reflect, for different levels and differentiation in your classroom, but we already have it basically set up and ready for you, so you can easily plug and play, do a couple of adjustments as you need. We also know that newcomers need to work in both languages, their native language, their home language, and English. So giving them that option of choice, which we'll talk about more later, to be able to decide how they want to access the content. And we need things that work across all domains. So we are called Listenwise. Listening is something we believe in very strongly. That is very important to our mission. But listening, again, just like our newcomers, doesn't exist on an island unto itself. Listening is something that connects to all of the different domains. Listening, speaking, reading, and writing, they all feed into one another. And our students, English learners or not, need to be able to access the content through all of those different domains and work on all those different domains. So I'll talk a little bit more about Listenwise now for those of you who may not never have worked with Listenwise. We are a platform where we have over 3,000 short lessons that connect to what you're teaching in subjects as diverse as English language, ELD, which we're going to be talking about a lot today, STEM, social studies, all different kinds of things. The lessons really range in length. So there's something out there for everybody. We have some lessons that are as short as 30 seconds. Our weird news lessons we know are popular with ELD classrooms. And they're also very short. So they make great sort of bell ringer activities for teachers. We also have some that are longer, and the one we're going to be talking about today later on is one of the longer ones. So just to let you know, that is not an example of all of our lessons on the platform. That's probably one of our longer lessons, but for us, longer means about 5 minutes. So you're still talking fairly short. They're engaging, they're relevant, and they feature authentic voices, which we think is a great way to hook students, regardless of where they come from, what language is their primary language. We think that just the best way to teach is to tell a compelling story. If you tell compelling stories, people will listen. And our lessons on Listenwise all have built-in scaffolds and options to differentiate for your students' needs, be it English learning differences, or grade levels. Next, I'll talk about some of our general learning goals on Listenwise. We believe, first and foremost, in teaching content and language together. That's what you're really going to get through using our platform. We're teaching vocabulary and academic language and literacy skills, which we just talked about, the different domains. Covering curriculum content and background knowledge. All of our content is aligned for the different states. If you're in the United States, we all have state-specific curriculum content that's tied to curriculum. If you're a WIDA state, we just launched our WIDA framework connections there as well, so you can look at that there. And you can build background knowledge, which is we've already talked about. It's very important. SEL skills, that social emotional learning, is something we hear about all the time from our teachers. And we think that this is a particularly strong area for podcasts, for videos, because you get access to that first person narration. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how podcasts do that and how that can apply particularly to newcomers in a minute. And then critical thinking skills. We have a lot of stories on our platform that are debate stories where you can have students take a side on a particular issue, really use that as a jumping off point for maybe a research assignment. You can kind of find these as ways to talk about media literacy and using critical thinking skills by using our various lessons. This is a lot of text, so I will not be asking you to read through this whole thing. I encourage you to read it more closely when you get the slide deck as a follow-up to the webinar. But in a nutshell, I just want to take a moment to mention that the SciOp model informed our inclusion of features to help students build background knowledge and access comprehensible input like videos, images, and interactive transcripts. We also include native language supports. Presently, we just have Spanish language, but in the future, we are very excited to hopefully not too far into the future offer a variety of additional languages. We're going to go in order. The plan is by most prevalent spoken, the ones we get the most requests for. So you can look forward to that coming soon. And some of our language supports include things like embedded dictionaries and things along those lines. Our lessons are highly scaffolded and invite students to use effective strategies for learning language, thinking critically, and deepening their understanding of meaningful content. And just one more slide of SciOp, but I'll just say that one of the other great things about our lessons is that they do include teacher's guides, so that before you assign a lesson, while you're planning on doing that, it will go through some of the learning objectives. What are the key vocabulary terms that people are going to come across? Are there any cognates for your Spanish language speakers that you might want to be aware of, so that you can really dive into this with your students with minimal prep work, hopefully on your end. It's all kind of laid out easily for you. And then in this section, I just wanted to highlight or really answer the question that you might be asking. So why podcasts? So there's lots of different approaches that you could take to teach content to your students, but why might podcasts be an effective tool, especially for your English learners and particularly for your newcomers? Well, I happen to be a huge fan of podcasts and audiobooks, and my family watches everything with subtitles. So I've been an easy convert to Listenwise. But if you are not like me yet, although I highly encourage you to try some of those tools out on your own, you may not know, but listening really can be the great equalizer. By building our listening skills, we are building across so many other domains at the same time. And it is a critical skill to keep growing. And it can be wonderful to use in conjunction with learning a new language as well. Our content on Listenwise is designed with the principles of the universal design of learning. We keep those in mind to help English learners access the same content as native speakers while they improve their English language abilities. And I just wanted to share this quote from one of our high school ELD teachers who talks about how the stories are high interest and usually less than 5 minutes. And it's a great way to practice listening to English in a real world academic way. Next, I promised we'd come back to socio-emotional learning and talking about mirrors, windows, and doors. And in general, we know that literature has the ability to provide students, to provide the reader with windows, mirrors, and doors. Like other instructional texts, podcasts can do that. However, with podcasts or video, you have the ability to hear it directly from the people involved. The first person audio is an incredibly great way to build that empathy for people whose experiences are very different from your own, or actually maybe quite similar to your own. One of the ways that you can use this in your classroom with your newcomers, your English learners, or just any student at all, is that you can select. We have a variety of different kinds of lessons that represent different groups that you'd find in the United States, across the world. I have a few examples here that are a part of our ELD collection that you could review and say, hey, I want to put this out there for my students because this is something that reflects their culture or their experiences, and I want to have them feel included in being able to include that in the classroom. Or Conversely, choose something that you don't think your students have had access to. We have a lot of local stories as well from local media partners. So choosing something that's local, that is new information for your newcomers, but is important information maybe for them to become culturally acclimated to your particular community, be another really great way to use this as well. And our platform, just to explain a little bit more how it goes, we have our ELD lessons, which are aligned with ELP 1 through 3, and we have our general education lessons, which are ELP 4 through 6. So we call them Gen Ed, but really, depending on your students' needs and where they are, you can use different lessons on our platform to teach to different English language acquisition levels. So, for the purposes of newcomers, you would be more in the ELD lesson library, which you will always be able to tell it's purple on our platform, and also in parentheses it will say ELD. So, those would be the ones you're going to want to go in. One thing I do want to mention is that right now we do have the content in English and Spanish, except for the audio. Presently, our audio is just in English. We are working on that. That is something that we are trying to get to source that Spanish language audio so we can include that as well. And we are, as I mentioned before, looking to increase our language offerings across the board beyond Spanish in general. So this is ever growing, and we're very excited to see it develop as we hear from teachers what they need. And one of the other things we provide is, we talked about the teacher's guide before, but one of the things that you can find in the teacher's guide is also information about what to do before listening, during listening, and after listening, which include discussion questions, comprehension questions, and other forms of assessment as well, so that you can really measure and make sure that the comprehension that you hoped would happen did happen. And before we go into the nuts and bolts practical tips that we're going to be sharing today for how you might use a Listenwise lesson, or how you might use a podcast or video content to teach to newcomers, I wanted to address this sort of essential question that I think is important to discuss, which is, what is the difference between rigorous content and unrealistic content when it comes to newcomers? We had a webinar recently where this was something that came up in the question portion at the end, and people were sort of wrestling with that idea. And I think people have lots of different points of view, but I would love to give this to Efrain and ask, what are we talking about when we say, what is rigorous content and what is unrealistic content for newcomers?
Yeah, definitely. Before I answer that, Eva, I want to address why I'm here with Listenwise. So, as a ELD teacher of level ones and twos out here in California and newcomers, I, again, going back to the notion that as teachers, we must continue to beef up our EL toolkit, right? What tools are available out there to help us educators to be able to address specific linguistic needs on this continuum, right? Listening was a huge area in our data story, that how can we teach our ELs to become better listeners? And so I was looking and looking and looking out there, and that's how I came across Listenwise. Because what Listenwise does, it addresses a need, right, for my ELs, for my students, for my newcomers. And how can I teach my ELs, my English learners, my multilingual learners, to become better listeners? In order to become a good listener, you got to practice. You have to practice. And so that's why I like Listenwise, because of the one, I'm already exhausted, right, as an educator. But the fact that I can go into the teacher instructions, it's all pre done for me. Now, if I want to go deeper, I can go deeper, but at least it covers a lot of the best practices, right? I call it the ABCs of effective newcomer instruction. One, building background, right, which is B. But before B comes A, we must assess our students' prior knowledge. What do they know? Right? They are coming with their cups full, right? Typically, we don't see it like that way. Maybe, oh, they're coming from, Oaxaca, they're coming from El Salvador, and because of this language divide, we often assume, right? And let's be honest, we sometimes assume, which is not good to assume sometimes, but we assume that they have not had great educators or great opportunities or have great experiences. But you'll be surprised, by just getting to know their prior knowledge, they might come in to teach us something, right? So again, the ABCs of effective newcomer instruction. One, assess their prior knowledge. How can you do that? By just, showing having them partner with other students that speak their same language, right? Having them kind of, give them an image, which we're going to address. But again, coming back to this question, right? I truly believe that all students must have access to the rigorous Common Core standards, right? How do we do that with the newcomer, right? And what is realistic? What is non realistic? We know that language acquisition is going to take time. We know that I prefer to go a foot deep in learning rather than just an inch deep. What do I mean by that? That it's going to take them more time to go through a listen wise story, right? Instead of taking, 5 minutes and actually listen the story, right? With regular English only students, it might take them a week to divide and to understand what they're reading, right? And then do the part three in the California ELD framework, right? Teaching foundational skills, teaching them how to read, right? And so, again, knowing that they must have an opportunity. And the unrealistic content for newcomers is when I don't provide any background, I don't check for understanding, I don't deliver comprehensible input, and I don't engage them. If I'm just going to give them information, they're not going to engage, and that's not going to help them. But if I provide all of the necessary ABCs of effective newcomer instruction, again, assessing prior knowledge, building background, checking for understanding, whether it's in English or their primary language, and leveraging technology to minimize the language divide, then I'm going to engage them in this language journey, right? That's the ultimate goal. And to go deep, I'd rather go in deep and having them be able to read a sentence, a word, right? Rather than just going through the lesson quickly and then not getting anything. So, and I'll kind of talk more a little bit as we get into the anatomy of my ELD lesson.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so this is really the anatomy of an ELD lesson. I'm going to hand over to Efrain to share with us how he would go about moving through a Listenwise lesson. For this one, we've selected Jane Goodall Urges Hope as one of our ELD stories. And as I mentioned before, it is a longer one, so I don't want to dissuade anyone from thinking, but wait a minute, I have my K through 5. We see K through 5, we have shorter stories. But hopefully these same tips will help you with whatever story you wanted to choose. So Efrain, I'll let you take it
Yeah,
away.
so as educators, we get to pick the stories, right? Or sometimes I even allow my students to pick the stories. We vote on it, right? So this is a story I chose. Why did I choose it? Because I think everyone needs to know who Jane Goodall is, right? And so right off the bat, I knew that this task was going to be rigorous and was going to be challenging for my newcomers. But that does, as an educator, my job is to utilize all of the tools that I've acquired as a language development teacher to give them access to this beautiful story, and to begin to listen through listen to this podcast. So the first thing I like to do is I like to take a look at the text. I like to take a look at all of the resources that are there, and realizing for my newcomers, it's going to take them more time, right? So the first thing I like to take a look at is like, what are the key vocabulary words that Listen Wise has given me, right? And I'm going to start there. So take a look at your vocabulary words. Eva, can we jump to, I think, 3 slides down or 2 slides down? One more there. So here's an example. So hope. Hope is one of these essential vocabulary words within this lesson. So again, front loading, right? Building this background, giving them, some intensive vocabulary development, right? So anything that you see here in green, my students are actually working through. So they're learning about syllabication, right? How many syllables does hope have? So visually, you can see here, right, that it's one syllable. So we talk about that, right? Multisyllabic words, right? What does that mean? And so if this was a multisyllabic word, you would see a dot between the syllables, right? So really quick, are they able to do this? Absolutely, right? Because visually they can see that it only has one syllable. The second thing I like to do, I like to provide them an image. an icon, a picture. So I'm using an icon here of what hope is. And this is a symbol that in America we know that, hey, fingers crossed, right? We're hoping that this is going to work out. And then they provide the term translation. So I'm going to give you another resource beyond just Google Translate, right? I like to use wordreference.com. It's an online dictionary. Which so cool about this online resource is that not only does it give me the translation, right, but it also gives me a sentence in English and in their home language, the language that I'm translating, which is powerful because they're able to see the definition of this word, not just a translation of hope, esperanza, right? Right? So they type in the translation of that word in there. And because of the type of culture that we're creating in our classrooms, these students want to learn each other's language, which is so beautiful, right? And say, hey, if you want to write it down, write it down, right? It's all about promoting multilingualism, right? Promoting language, right? English is not more important than Spanish. Spanish is not more important than English. All languages are important. And then the next thing I like to do is the same definition that is used in Listenwise, I put it here, copy and paste. And what's so cool about Listenwise, they use this powerful um, read and write translation, read and write extension that you can actually get images of the words. If you just click on the word filling, boom, you get an image for that word. If you want to know what to get a picture, an illustration of wanting, boom, it's there. And they can just grab it and save it and just drag it over to this here is created in a Google slide. So boom, give them the definition, visual definition of hope. Then I record myself reading that definition. Why is that important? Because they are able to take ownership of the learning, and they are able to begin to read, right? Even if it's just by memorization, that's okay, right? For them to begin identifying these words within the definition, right? And then parts of speech, we go over that, right? Using edu protocols and then the definitions. So they get to learn how to use a dictionary. And then they have to create a sentence. And here's where I leverage Google Translate, right? Now, this only works if they're literate in their primary language, right? If they're not, then I can actually pair them with the language broker within my classroom where they can actually help them out and write out the sentence. The whole thing is there's no excuse for them not to be able to write a sentence. I have a student, a newcomer from Oaxaca. Spanish is his second language. He's learning English, which is his third language, and his native language, the language of his ancestors, is Zapotec, right? And the first few weeks of school, he would always say, "No puedo, profesor. No puedo. I can't. I can't. This is too hard for me." I said, "No, we must address the mindset before we actually reach the mind, right? Again, that preaching, right? Reach the heart, reach the essence of who he is before I can teach him." And so just building the self-esteem that he can, right? So when working with students that are newcomers, we must create a safe environment, a safe culture within our classroom. They must be able to fail. Let us celebrate failure, right? Right. How do you say this word? Hope. Everyone, boom, say hope. Then I pick individual students to say the word hope, right? Then I have them read the sentence. You might be thinking, well, they're a brand new newcomer. Yes, they can read with the right support, with the right celebration of failure, and with the right, encouragement. They are able to at least repeat the words. They may not know what they're reading at the beginning, but again, it's creating that risk environment where they begin to just use language, whether or not they're saying it correctly, allow them to do that, right? So great resource here. And then building again background, if you can go to the previous slide, Eva, again, using this visual. Usually this is actually the second image that I show. The first image just has the image of the ape, right? And so the chimpanzee. And so they just see, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder? And I have a slide that actually translates that. What do you see? ¿Qué ves? And then in the other languages. And they begin to write in their primary language. Again, if they can't write because they're a slight newcomer, that's okay. Their partner can help them out, right? They annotate. And so then we begin to have a conversation. And then the second slide is here. I then give them the specific vocabulary words that I want them to learn, right? Hair, eyes, feet, nails, etc. So again, building background is so key, so important. If we can go back before listening, so that's something that we do, right? Teaching the vocabulary, so important. Now, in the resource stack, we also I list a resource that it's called Rewardify. Basically, Rewardify does, I use the transcript, and I love that Listenwise allows me to download the transcript. And once you download it, you can do so much with it, right? But I analyze the transcript, and by using Rewardify, not only does it highlight rigorous words that students might have difficulty, it also substitutes, it rewordifies that word with a simpler vocabulary word. So again, utilizing all these tools to minimize this language divide, right? Using the photos. I love the fact that ListenWise has at least three images that you can use these images in your slide deck to be able to begin to have this conversation, right? Here in the slide deck, you see a small image of Jane Goodall, right? We can have a conversation. Who is she? Oh, grandma, older lady, old, etc., etc. But then you begin to build their vocabulary, right? And again, as you're writing all of the words that they're using, that's that's a beauty of ListenWise, that it gives you all of these resources. And guess what? They also provide videos, and this is where you can leverage the closed captions within the videos to at least minimize the language divide for those students that are able to read their home language, right? And if they're not able to, that's okay, because it gives you great insight to whether or not they could be a slight newcomer, right, or a safe newcomer. If they're not able to read Arabic, if they're not able to read in Spanish, then that's a good indicator that they are going to need intensive, right, multiple tiers of student support, right? And so that's a whole other topic, a whole other subject, right? But at least it gives you great insight to be aware of that, right? And then videos, awesome opportunities for them to see, to hear, to read, to pause, to go back, etc. Right? And then again, the ABCs of effective newcomer instruction: assess their prior knowledge, build their background, and as you're going through the vocabulary, checking for understanding of these key vocabulary words that are there, right? And so if we can go on, Eva, to the next slide, diagramming paragraphs, right? So, and I love to use word clouds. And so because ListenWise allows you to download the transcript, I take the transcript, boom, put it in the word cloud, and then visually too, boom, you can see what are the most used words in this transcript. So this helps me that hope, there's that key vocabulary word that they need to know about what hope is. Martin, something, people, Goodall, right? And so, how do you pronounce Goodall's name, right? And so we can talk about that, right? So again, powerful way where you can actually download the transcript, allow them to make the text. I have my student. I assign this awesome ListenWise activity through Google Classroom. They are able to, play with the text, and they are able to enlarge the text, all of these things that are that are valuable for students, right? Accessibility features, right? And so not only that, they're also able to using a powerful Google Chrome extension called Immersive Reader, which is a game changer for our newcomers. Because the game changer is, it allows them to be able to take ownership of their learning, right? And to be able to listen to every single word, to be able to translate the text, and to hear the text read to them in their primary language, and also listen to it in English as well. So great information. Okay. So again, what I'd like to do, a great uh, methodology, pedagogy is explicit direct instruction, especially with their newcomers. I do, we do, you do, right? So they read the paragraph together before listening, circling any key vocabulary words that they know how to read or don't know how to read, depending on the student, you know, underlining key phonological skills as they come up in the text, tie all of this skills into what we're learning. So if we can go on to the next slide. Right? And so this is a screenshot from using Rewardify, right? Not only it highlights possible difficult words that students might have difficulty with, right? Like pandemic, right? What is pandemic? Boom. It's a widespread disease, right? We can talk about that. But I chunk every week, we go through a paragraph. Again, going deep with our newcomers. And so the final assessment, if we can go on to the next slide, is how are we the assessment is can they read what they practiced for a whole week, and are they able to utilize Google Docs and use the text speech to text feature to be able to read the sentence, the paragraph, and have Google transcribe their voice. And that's a great way, right? So great resources here for you to be able to use closed notes. What I like to do is, like, because I'm able to get the transcript, I'm able to delete certain words. And then as they read the paragraph, listen to the paragraph, right? Using a word bank, they can write the words that they heard in that sentence. Some great way to actually use closed notes with your newcomers, as at the end of the week, once they've gone through and have practiced through the paragraph.
Perfect. I just wanted to bop back here for a second since we were talking about different exercises, different tools to use, just to highlight that Listenwise on our platform, we include a lot of these things as well. We have some great ELD listening organizers that are all ready to go. You can just download them, have students start filling them out right away. So you don't have to taking that extra bit of legwork out of things as well.
And as we kind of wrap things up, what's really important is that we get our newcomers to speak. We get them to use language, right? I recently attended CAVE out here in California, the California Association of Bilingual Educators, and there was an alarming statistic that was shared that and this is not just newcomers, this is all second language learners, right? Multilingual learners, that 12% of their day is actually used, they actually speak about 12% in their day, right? Which is not a lot of time. So, how do we learn language? We have to use it in the classroom. We have to have opportunities to speak in the classroom. So, I encourage all of you, get your newcomers to read by utilizing some of these tools like that we've learned today, to be able to read with the right supports. They are able um, to uh, to do the tasks. And we included some digital tools for you to take a look at. Again, immersive reader, we forgot to add that to our slide deck, but just Google immersive reader, Google Chrome extension. If you're a Microsoft school district, school site, then you know about immersive reader, right? Because it's built into the products. But again, using Flipgrid to record themselves reading, the read and write extension, ChatGPT, right? How you can even change the Lexile uh, to the article if you want to, using Rewardify and using word clouds. Thank you.
Wonderful. And so, like I mentioned, we've mentioned a couple of times, we're going to be including this PDF in future emails sent out. This is also going to be available on EdWeb. We have additional information also if you want to learn more about what the Listenwise platform can do and how it can help you reach your newcomers and any English learners you have in your classroom. We have some really in-depth articles that go step by step and explain how to use all the different functionality, and some blog posts that are all about how to introduce our new ELD lesson library into your classroom, testimonials from educators that are using this already, ways to build phonemic awareness, and also content specific to WIDA and also specific to California. We have quite a bit of that. And that brings us to the end. But as promised, we are going to go back and look at some of your questions. So I'm just going to go in right now and take a look. Also, let's see, view audience questions.
Yeah, please send us any questions. So,
So I'm going to read them out to you, Efrain, if that's
okay,
okay. So
absolutely.
I have a question from Diana. The interrupted education can compound the obstacles in learning a second language. How do we balance variables facing the ELLs with the fact that these students may need additional special education supports?
Right. So if it's a language issue, then it's a language issue, right? So if you're seeing some cognitive delays or cognitive issues, and I that has to be dealt with your local special ed uh, professionals to determine, is it a language issue, is it a cognitive issue, right? So language and cognitive, two different aspects, right? So that's where your professionals need to be able to be well versed on language acquisition and development to distinguish, is it a language issue or developmental issue. So um, I hope that answers the question, Diana.
Great. And then I'm going to show this next question. How do you get buy-in from general ed teachers to go on this language journey willingly when they receive a newcomer? And remind you, the ESL teacher who pulls out once a day, I don't speak Spanish.
Yeah, that is a challenge, right? And so that's why we must preach, even with our own colleagues, right? And so being intentional about, one, having your systems in place is important, right? Administrators, right? Expectations, but two, to also, if you don't have those systems, Tatiana, it's like I encourage you to advocate for your students and to work with your administrators. That's what I do. Is like to find colleagues that are willing, that are able to, and have the heart to be able to work with these students, right, that need that additional help when they don't even speak their language, right. I think Maya Angelou said it best. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. I'd rather have a teacher that will make them feel loved, right, than a teacher that's just there, right? So again, is connecting with those teachers that want to work with these students, and it's a great opportunity for them to learn how to become better educators. Great question,
Wonderful.
Tatiana.
Let's see. Let me show this one. Love the vocabulary slide. I knew it would be a hit. Who wouldn't love something like that? Is there a template of this that is available to be shared with participants?
Absolutely. So I love giving my resources. And so I will definitely share that at the actual slide deck with Eva, and then she'll send it out to you guys.
Fantastic. Again, that's another great question. How long do you spend on a Listenwise podcast? That's a question I asked you too, and I'm excited to hear you tell everybody the answer.
Yeah, it depends, right? If I'm working with newcomers, Tatiana, that's a great question. A podcast can take me anywhere from 5 to 7 days. And I'm being honest with you. Again, I'd rather go in a foot deep rather than just doing an inch deep, right? So it takes time. Language acquisition takes time, and our newcomers need every single opportunity to actually get into it, right? If it's for my higher ELs, maybe 2 days, and sometimes one day for my higher threes and fours.
And I'm curious to know if you have any tips for this person. Elizabeth is asking for testing. How can I help pre-K students? Efrain, do you have any? You're a middle school teacher. Do you have
Absolutely,
any thoughts on that one?
but I have taught elementary, right? So I think elementary teachers, woo-hoo, right, make the best middle school teachers and secondary teachers with newcomers
Oh,
because we know how to teach language, right? So pre-K 3, right? Typically, we don't like to put our newcomers in newcomer programs because all kids are learning language. So, and for in terms of testing your pre-K students, right? Um, depending what are you wanting to assess, right? So is it that you're wanting to assess their primary language, or you're wanting to assess their knowledge of what you're teaching them? That's up to you. You can have them actually draw, right, illustrate what they've learned. There are different ways to assess students, right? So I guess I need a little bit more clarity on the question, Elizabeth. I'm sorry, but yet you can assess, you know uh, assess them in their primary language. I sometimes do that because I want, do they understand the content in English? And if they're able to actually articulate and share that in their primary language, that's great.
wonderful. And I'm seeing some questions come in about how to sign up for Listenwise. Would love for everybody to sign up for Listenwise. We give you a free access to our to premium. You can sign up now on listenwise.com and follow the instructions there to get to a place where you can sign up today. So you can go ahead and get started on your Listenwise journey. That will be just for a limited period of time, free access. However, if you're just loving it, you want to introduce it to more people on your team, always get in touch with us. You can email us at info@listenwise.com and talk to us about what your needs are, and we'll see if we can accommodate. There's so many great questions. Want to get to this question? We sort of touched on this very briefly. Is there a way for students to record their voices? They can listen to their production. Not presently on Listenwise. However, we do endorse app smashing, which is something that Efrain talked about a little while ago. And you mentioned Flipgrid, and we hear that from a lot of teachers that they like to use Flipgrid.
Yeah, that's a great product too. So, in the slide deck that I will be showing you, sending to Evan, they'll send it out. There's a list of resources where you can actually record voice as well. But Flip, it's now called Flip. They've changed their name, right?
Flip.
It's a great product that you can do that.
Wonderful. And here we have another question. How do ESL teachers help SLIFE students in Gen Ed class to help boost their abilities in a multilingual classroom?
Right. So again, the ABCs, right, of newcomer or ESL, right, the EL students, right. Again, every teacher should be providing, making sure that they're building their background, that they're some way utilizing technology to acquire what knowledge do they know about the subject, and providing lots of visuals, right? And doing checking for understanding and providing these sentence frames, right? And then, making sure that your comprehensible input is actually appropriate, right? By using TPR, total physical response, gestures, slowing down, right? Slowing down your speech rate, uh, you know. And so all of those things are really important. My good friend Tan Hoying, who's I don't know if you guys know who he is, but huge advocate for newcomers and ELs. He often says, "How do lessons fail ELs? Number one, speaking too long, right? Number two, not breaking tasks into steps. Number three, not using visuals, not allowing students to use their primary language, right? Or restricting their home language use, and then not differentiating your tasks, right? What does your task look like for a newcomer, right? And so if you take a look at that language acquisition progress, it shows you what students are able to do at each of the developmental stages. So that's one way that you can definitely get your general ed class to be able to boost their abilities in their classrooms. Great question, Courtney.
Wonderful. And I think this is our last question we have time for today. How could this be helpful for ESL teachers who push in or pull out students? We work on content that the classroom teachers are teaching.
Well, Lori, are you asking how to utilize ListenWise within as you push in or pull out students, or just in general? I don't know if you can respond in the chat so quickly. I don't
If
know if
we
you
could get
can
a
share.
response, we will follow up with that. But
Yeah.
if we cannot, you can also always email us at info@listenwise.com and we will get you an answer to your question, even if that means asking Efrain to share a little bit more of his knowledge with us. So, thank you all so much for not just I have had the pleasure of going back and looking at the chat, and it is just wonderful to see all of the questions and comments and observations, and also people helping each other. Someone did mention that ES or EL teachers are the best at sharing, which I don't want to make anyone feel bad, so I won't confirm or deny that, but I suspect you may be right. And I love seeing all of this being shared in the chat. So thank you all so much for really bringing with your all today and participating and your great questions. And thank you most of all to Efrain. You can follow him across all of his different social channels. He's very active on Twitter, and he has some great Twitter communities as well. And please, as I mentioned, sign up for a free premium trial today at listenwise.com. You do not need a premium code. That's just for if you were given a premium code by one of our sales folks. But if you just want to sign up for a premium trial, you can just go through the system the normal way. You just click there. And if it says don't have a code, just click on that link and it'll just give you to a generic sort of sign up and you can enter into the free trial. Thank you, everybody, so much. Efrain, any last words, tips, words of wisdom?
No, for all you educators that are out there, we appreciate you. I see you. Thank you for all the great work that you guys do with our multilingual learners. And know that you're not alone. So if you ever want to reach out to me, please just reach out to me. And for those of you in California, if you ever want to come and visit my classroom, this is actually a picture of my classroom. Please come and visit. You can see all the stuff in action and in person. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.